This is my farm on a flat map, but it wasn't always like this. I started with absolutely nothing, but I managed to build my own farm that can generate tens of thousands of dollars. Today, we'll go through all stages of development, from creating field to building a railway for our train. If you're interested, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Having arrived on the flat map, we had only one small lawn mower at our disposal. Despite its modest size, I was confident that even with such equipment, we could gradually earn the starting capital needed to build our own farm. Around us stretch endless meadows covered with dense grass. This is our first and only resource. The map contains only a few key objects: a store where we can purchase machinery and equipment, and a selling point where we will have to sell everything we produce. So I didn't waste a single minute and immediately started mowing grass, choosing a plot right next to the selling point. This decision would save time on transportation and allow us to start earning faster. Our mower is convenient in that it simultaneously cuts the grass and collects it in a special compartment. This compartment can hold up to 1,200 liters of freshly cut grass. As soon as the container was completely filled, I headed straight to the selling point and delivered the grass. For the first batch, I received only $180. Of course, the amount is small, but even it seemed encouraging to me. After all, this is only the beginning of our journey. I didn't stop and continued working, methodically mowing more and more grass areas. A little time passed, and my hard work began to pay off. The balance in our account gradually grew and soon exceeded $2,000. This was the first serious step toward fulfilling our dream of building a full-fledged, prosperous farm from scratch. I continued working without slowing down. Soon, after collecting over $8,000, I decided to take a break. We had already mowed a huge amount of grass, and now we had a fairly decent amount in our account. The money we earned should be enough to buy our very first tractor, a crucial step on the path to building a real farm. Without wasting time, I headed to the store to check the available equipment. Opening the discount section, I noticed a small tractor priced at just over $7,000. It turned out to be exactly what we needed at this early stage. Without hesitation, I bought it. Since the tractor was already in stock, I decided to also purchase a plow for it. It's essential so we can till our first field. The plow cost almost $1,000. That was enough to completely use up all the money we had earned. The entire amount we got from selling grass went into this important purchase. But now we had the equipment we needed to move forward. The next step was to decide where our first field would be located. I hired a worker who would follow us on the tractor, while I, in the meantime, got back on the lawn mower and started clearing a path to our future farm. I tried to go as far from the store as possible, because I plan to set up large fields here in the future and make serious money on them. After going quite a distance, I cleared a patch of land where a full-fledged farm will eventually be built. To mark the beginning of our presence here, I set up a tent, temporary, but still my own home. By that time, the sun was already setting, and I decided that I had done enough for today. Tired, but satisfied with the results, I went to sleep, full of plans for the next day. The next day, I noticed that we had a small loan of $400. It was charged for equipment maintenance, but I think we'll be able to pay it off fairly quickly. For now, I decided to plow our first field using the new tractor. After driving a bit away from the tent, I began working. I decided to keep the field small for now, since it's still unclear whether we'll be able to manage a larger area without proper equipment. I plowed a plot of approximate length and width, leveled the edges, and with that, the creation of our first field was complete. The main task now became repaying the existing debt, so I got back on the lawnmower and headed to the selling point, where I continued mowing grass. After just a few trips, the loan was fully repaid. After that, I started saving up money to rent a seeder, as it was time to sow the first crop on our new field. I decided not to buy a seeder, since we'd only be using it occasionally, and there's no point in paying more for something that would just sit idle. After earning a bit more than $2,000, I decided it was time to start sowing. I went to the store and began selecting a seeder suitable for us. After a short search, I found a decent option, the rental of which cost only $600. It was a very good deal, and I rented it without hesitation. In addition to the seeder, of course, we also needed seeds. I bought several bags, enough to cover our entire field. After that, I returned to the farm, detached the plow, and went back to the store to pick up the seeder. Although our tractor looks pretty compact, it handled the new seeder quite confidently, pulling it without much effort. Arriving back at the field, I began sowing. I chose oats because they currently have a good price. Besides, harvesting oats also produces straw, which can later be useful, either for selling or for use on the farm. The sowing process went fairly quickly. Our first field was fully sown, and I unloaded the leftover seeds into storage, since they were bought, not rented. After finishing the work, I returned the seeder to the store, as we no longer needed it. The sowing was complete. Now we just have to wait until the oats fully ripen. And while the field is growing, I resumed mowing and selling grass to continue increasing our budget. And when our balance already exceeded $4,000, I returned to the farm and decided to start building a silage pit. This was an important decision because it would allow us to significantly speed up the process of making money. Silage sells at a fairly good price, especially in large volumes. After carrying out the preparation work, I completed the construction and decided to take a short break. In the meantime, it started raining outside, but the rain soon stopped, and I was able to continue. I began filling the silage pit with freshly cut grass. By that time, I had managed to load about 9,000 liters. That was enough to move on to the next stage, compacting. I got into our tractor since it weighs much more than the lawnmower, which means it would do a much better job compacting the forage. After driving over the surface several times, I achieved the desired density. When the silage was fully compacted, I covered it with a plastic sheet so the fermentation process could begin. With that, the workday came to an end, and I went to sleep, satisfied with how much I had accomplished. A few days later, our silage was fully ready. The problem was that we needed to collect and transport it somehow. So I got into the lawnmower and headed to the selling point to earn a small amount of money for buying a trailer. After earning about $4,000 more, I went to the store to see what options we had. I was also thinking about buying a mower for our tractor, so I decided to sell the old lawnmower. It brought us $8,500. As usual, I first checked the discount section, but there was nothing suitable for us at the right price. Then I went to the trailer section and found an excellent option for $3,500. I bought it right away. After that, I checked the mower section and found that we were just $41 short of buying a suitable model. It was a minor problem because I knew there was still unsold silage left on the farm. I decided to take it and use the money to buy the mower. I hurried back to the farm, got into the tractor, and headed for the trailer we had recently bought. It was standing near the store, but when I tried to hook it up, I got really upset. The rear wheels of the tractor lifted off the ground and it couldn't move. The trailer turned out to be too heavy. In the end, I had to sell our old tractor. We got almost $5,000 for it. Now it was time to choose something better. I found a great option, but it cost a little over $42,000. so I had to lease it. That wasn't the most cost-effective decision, because now we'd have to pay monthly rent, but there was no other choice. At least now, we had enough money to buy the mower, and I bought it right away. All the equipment cost us just over $10,500. It was definitely a good purchase. Now, we could not only transport silage, but also mow and sell grass much faster. Without wasting time, I got into our new tractor, hooked up the trailer, and headed to the farm to start loading the silage. Once all the silage was loaded, I went to the selling point. After selling it, we earned a little over $3,000. Not bad at all, considering we hadn't cut that much grass. Then I returned to the farm and decided to check on our oats. It was still growing, so I needed to focus on something else. I thought that producing silage was too time-consuming, so I sold the silage pit. Instead, I decided to build a sheep pen. It was already equipped with an automatic waterer, so we would only need to deliver grass from time to time, which is quite convenient. The pen itself cost us $4,000. I also bought sheep for nearly another $4,000. Thanks to them, we could regularly sell wool, and the income from it is quite high. I think the sheep will pay for themselves quickly. After that, I got back into the tractor, drove to the store to pick up the mower I had bought, and returned to the farm. The mower turned out to be quite large, so mowing the grass went very quickly. Then I hooked up the forage trailer and completely filled it with freshly cut grass. I delivered the grass to our sheep and completely filled the feeders. Since there was still some grass left in the meadow, I decided to take it to the selling point. There, I managed to earn just under $8,500. When I returned home, it was already quite late, so I went to rest. The next day, upon waking up, I noticed that our oats had ripened and it was now time to start harvesting. However, a new problem arose. We didn't yet have the necessary equipment for harvesting. I went to the store to check the prices for combines and trailers. It turned out that we needed at least $20,000 to buy a suitable combine and a trailer for transporting the harvested oats. Returning to the farm, I got back to mowing grass. I decided to earn the missing amount specifically through grass sales. Fortunately, with our new mower, this could be done quite quickly. I mowed a large area and immediately began selling the grass. After selling all the grass, our balance reached almost $25,000, which made me very happy. First, I took the forage trailer back to the farm, and then I headed to the store to finally purchase the long-awaited equipment. I purchased a combine harvester, a header for it, and also a trailer for transporting oats for sale. All of this cost us just over $21,000. Now, I just needed to attach the trailer and the header and head home. I drove the combine myself, and I had a worker drive the tractor. Even though our tractor isn't very big, it turned out to be quite fast. We got home very quickly. I immediately started harvesting. When the combine's grain tank was completely full, I unloaded the oats into the trailer. It wasn't full yet, so I continued harvesting the remaining part of the field. When there was no more room in the grain tank and the trailer was completely full, I got into the tractor and headed to the selling point. For one full load of oats, we earned just over $3,000. After that, I returned and finished harvesting the remaining crop, unloaded it and sold it as well. As a result, our balance reached just over $12,000. Not a bad sum, I must say. Evening came, and I decided to go home to rest. Over the next few days, I once again mowed and sold grass, since it was time to start building the railway. During this time, I managed to earn a decent amount. Our balance reached just over $32,000. But that wasn't all. While I was working, our sheep produced a fair amount of wool. I decided to sell it. I loaded a full trailer and took it to the selling point. For 4 pallets of wool, we earned nearly $10,000. And that wasn't all the wool. There were still several pallets left on the farm. After selling those as well, our balance reached just over $47,000. That, I thought, would be enough to build a railway from the store to our farm. I immediately got to work, carefully laid the tracks, and then built a shed for the future locomotive. Finally, I purchased the locomotive itself. It cost $20,000. It may not be the most powerful one, but it's good enough to start with. I got into it and decided to test our work. I drove the locomotive to the farm. Everything worked perfectly. The only thing missing now was a wagon for the necessary tasks. But I think we'll fix that soon. For now, it's time to get some rest. Waking up in September, the first thing I did was start collecting the straw left after the oat harvest. I earned just under $1,500 for a full trailer. I decided to use this money to fix the problematic areas that had formed after the construction of the railway. After that, I continued collecting the remaining straw from the field and sold it too. Then I returned to the farm. I needed to continue building the railway line. I wanted to simplify the transportation of crops from our fields, so I decided to lay tracks right to the edge of the field. To do this, I had to dismantle part of the old road and start constructing a new branch running along the plot. Unfortunately, the money from selling the straw wasn't enough, so I decided to wait until our sheep produced enough wool. The proceeds from selling it would allow me to finish what I'd started. While I waited, I began expanding the field. The bigger it is, the more we can earn from the harvest. I managed to increase it nearly threefold, which will significantly boost our productivity. However, part of the plot that had already been harvested needs reclamation, and we don't have a cultivator. On top of that, I still want to finish building the railway. While the field was being expanded, the sheep didn't manage to produce enough wool for sale. So the only quick way to make money now is by selling grass. I hooked up the mower and began coating a huge area, since we urgently need money. By the way, this didn't take us as much time as I expected. I decided it would be better to first rake all the grass into windrows, and only then start collecting and selling it. But for that, we needed a windrower. Since we had no money to rent one, I sold one full trailer of grass. It brought in almost $2,000, enough to rent a windrower. I immediately went to the store, picked a suitable model, and then returned to the farm to first bring back the forage trailer. After that, I went back to the store, this time for the windrower. After hooking it up, I got right to work, slowly gathering the grass into neat windrows, since this greatly speeds up the later collection. When everything was ready, I returned the equipment to the store and headed home. It had already gotten dark outside, so I decided to rest. From the very morning, I already knew what I'd be doing. Huge area of uncut grass, and today it needed to be sold. Besides, I noticed that there was a debt on our account, a little over $2,000. It appeared because we are renting a tractor. That's bad, because every month we pay more and more for its rental. So I'm seriously considering returning it and buying our own. Also, we should stop using rented equipment altogether. These expenses are becoming more and more burdensome. The work wasn't difficult, but it took a lot of time. Luckily, the weather was great today, just right for collecting grass. The only thing that bothers me is the capacity of our trailer. I wish it were a bit bigger, but we'll upgrade it later. For now, our task is to earn enough money to continue building the railway. With every trailer sold, the balance slowly increased, and that brought real satisfaction. Fortunately, I managed to sell all the grass in half a day and earned almost $28,000 from it, quite a substantial amount. And when I returned to the farm, I saw that our sheep had already produced enough wool, which could also be sold. I hoped to earn a bit more money from it. I hooked up the regular trailer and started loading the wool pallets, then headed to the selling point. For all the accumulated wool, I received almost $12,000. A pretty good result, considering that all we did was just keep the feeders filled with grass. On the way back home, I started thinking that maybe we should focus more on sheep farming. After all, selling wool brings us a steady income, even if it's not huge. So I decided to invest part of the earned money into expanding the flock to buy another 50 sheep so that wool would be produced more and faster. This, in turn, would allow us to generate good profit. I think this plan will work. Buying 50 sheep cost us a bit over $26,000. I didn't fill the pen completely. I left some free space so that the sheep could reproduce and gradually increase in number. Since we still had a small amount of money left, I finally decided to build a shed for storing equipment. We had already accumulated quite a bit of machinery, but didn't have a proper place to keep it. For $10,000, I built a shelter, which I think will be enough for now. And since we had started doing construction, I also decided to build a convenient crossing over the rails to our field. Right now, we have to cross them very carefully because the tractor bounces hard on the tracks. Using pallets and boards, I managed to build a simple but reliable decking. It cost us very little, but made crossing the railway tracks much easier. After finishing all the work, I realized it was time to rest. Many more tasks still lie ahead. For several months, I was transporting the wool produced by our sheep to the store. I managed to earn a little over $115,000 from the sales, an excellent amount that would finally allow us to buy everything we had long dreamed of. First, I went to the store and started choosing a new tractor. Of course, I returned the old one. Instead, I chose a John Deere tractor. Its power was roughly equal to the previous model, but it had one important advantage: a front platform for attaching mounted equipment. This would be a big plus in the future and would significantly speed up our work. The tractor cost $45,000. I also immediately decided to purchase a cultivator, which would allow us not only to work the soil, but also to create new fields. After reviewing all the available options, I chose an inexpensive 4-meter cultivator, exactly the kind our new tractor could easily handle. Everything we needed was bought, and I got to work delivering the equipment. First, I got into the new tractor, attached the trailer to it, and took it to the farm. Then I went back for the cultivator and headed straight to the field to finish the job I had started. Once I arrived, I immediately got to work. The new cultivator turned out to be very convenient, and the job progressed quickly. In just half an hour, everything was ready. Now all that remained was to finish building the new branch of the railway. When I started laying the tracks, I immediately noticed that the route ran slightly beyond the edge of our field. And when construction was fully completed, I confirmed this. So I decided to expand the field a little more so that it would reach right up to the railway. In addition, I started thinking about creating a field on the other side of the tracks. After all, if we make another large field, we'll be able to harvest twice as much. So, without wasting any time, I immediately began expanding the first field. To make it as even as possible, I entered construction mode and marked the plot boundaries. After that, I continued working on soil preparation. When everything was ready, I slightly leveled the edges so the field would look neater. Then I started wondering whether it was worth spending time on creating another field right now. Considering all the advantages of this idea, I finally decided to go ahead and started marking the boundaries of the second field. It turned out to be about the same size as the first one, so I immediately got to work, since cultivating such a large area would take quite a lot of time. I finished only when the sun had already begun to set. I carefully transported the cultivator across the tracks and then laid a road to the new field while there was still daylight. I also decided to sell our old plow, since we now have a cultivator that can be used to create new fields. The plow is no longer needed, and so as not to return home empty-handed, I also bought a seeder and some sacks of seeds, because the next day I planned to start sowing. I chose the same model of seeder that we had rented last time. I really liked it. I also stocked up on a lot of seed bags, since we now have 2 fairly large fields. The entire purchase cost us just under $13,000. But this investment is definitely worth it. The seeder will come in handy more than once. After hooking it up to the tractor, I immediately poured in the seeds. They all fit, and there was even a bit of space left, which I filled with leftover seeds from the previous sowing. Carefully placing the seeder under the shelter, I went to rest. The day had been tough, but we did a great job. And that truly felt good. Early in the morning, as usual, I decided to check on our sheep to see how they were doing. And there I was met with a pleasant surprise. We had our first little lambs. This made me really happy, because the more sheep we have, the more wool they will produce, which means the higher our profit will be. After admiring the newborn lambs, I remembered that we still needed to sow our 2 huge fields. So I got into the tractor and immediately got to work. This time, I decided to plant canola. I figured we could earn more from selling it than from oats. Besides, I didn't feel like dealing with straw again. Pass after pass, I gradually sowed the first field, and within a few hours, it was completely done. After that, I moved on to the second field and continued sowing. By the time the day came to an end, the job was finished. Now all that remains is to wait for the canola to ripen. But before that, we still have a lot of preparation to do to simplify the harvesting and transportation process. Judging by the size of the fields, we'll have quite a lot of crop. After putting the trailer back in place, I decided to sell the accumulated wool. And just as I was approaching the selling point, I noticed that our tractor was almost out of fuel. But that wasn't a problem. There was a gas station nearby. I filled the tank to the top, and then I could calmly continue working. After selling the wool, our balance reached almost $63,500. This amount should be enough to buy a wagon for our locomotive. We'll be using it to transport the canola. The wagon cost us $40,000. It's quite a large sum, of course, but with it, we'll greatly simplify and speed up the transportation of the harvest. After the purchase, I returned to the farm, parked the trailer, and headed out on the locomotive to pick up the new wagon. Upon arriving at the store, I carefully coupled the wagon and headed back. Even though our locomotive doesn't look very powerful, it handled the task perfectly and pulled the wagon with no issues. Once I got back to the farm, I drove the train under the shelter. Now we just need to lay the tracks directly to the selling point so we can get there by train. I hope the remaining money in the budget will be enough to complete this part of the job. I decided to set up a convenient access route to the pallet selling point and to the grain elevator. After all, in the future, I plan to transport all the products produced on our farm exclusively by train. As a result, we ended up with a very beautiful railway, which I'm sure will pay for itself quickly. And this is just the beginning. Later on, I plan to build several more branches for all future train routes. After finishing the construction, I decided to check the work and took a ride on the locomotive all the way to the selling point. Everything worked perfectly. So, in a great mood, I headed off to rest. Early the next day, our sheep once again filled the storage area with wool pallets, so I took them to sell and earned almost $23,000 for the lot. With that money, I decided it was time to build myself proper housing. Living in a tent was getting harder and harder. Not far from the farm, I set up a mobile home. For now, I think that will be enough. Around the house, I put up a fence, built a small shed, planted flowers, and arranged the area to make it comfortable for living and resting. After that, I decided to take a short break until our canola fully ripened. The only thing I did during this period was sell wool, and by December, we had almost $124,000 in our account. But that wasn't all. Overnight, the sheep produced a new batch of wool, which I also sold. Our balance increased by approximately another $20,000. Now, we had enough funds to build a grain elevator near our fields. I planned to unload the harvested crop there, and then load the grain into our wagon. The elevator itself cost us $100,000. I also arranged a convenient access route to it, so the tractor could easily cross the tracks. In the end, we got a very convenient elevator, and since the harvest was already ripe, I could immediately begin collecting it. I got into the harvester and started working. Bit by bit, I collected the crop and transported it to the elevator. But I quickly realized that it would take a very long time to finish the job. I quickly realized that there was no way we'd be able to harvest both of these huge fields in just one day. The work wasn't going as fast as I'd hoped, and there was less and less time left until evening. But that's not a problem. I'm sure that by the next day we'll be able to finish everything we started and earn a pretty solid amount from selling the canola. The effort, the equipment, and all the work we've done will definitely pay off. The next morning, the weather was excellent, just right for harvesting. But before getting to work in the field, I decided to take care of the wool that our sheep had produced overnight. I loaded a full trailer and headed to the selling point. The earnings were pleasant. The balance increased by more than $10,000. On the way back, I decided to stop by the store. The reason was simple. My old trailer turned out to be too small. I had to drive back and forth all the time, so I sold it and started looking for a replacement. I wanted something spacious but not too expensive. After a short search, I settled on a rather unusual but very practical model and immediately headed home, since the field was waiting. Upon arrival, I got into the harvester and began the harvest. There was a lot of work ahead, and I tried to move quickly, regularly unloading the collected canola into the tractor, and when it filled up to the top, I transported the harvest to the grain elevator. After finishing the first field, I immediately moved on to the second one and continued working. The harvest was in full swing, and judging by the volume, it was going to be a busy day. The harvest took almost the entire day. Only by evening did I unload the last trailer of canola. The work was done. In total, I managed to collect about 80,000 litres from the two fields, which, you'll agree, is a very decent amount. That means we can make quite a bit of money from it. Without putting it off, I decided to sell everything right away. First, I put away all the equipment I had used during the day, then got into our locomotive, which already had an empty freight wagon attached. I headed to the grain elevator. There, I began gradually loading the harvested canola into the wagon. The process wasn't fast. The volume was serious, over 83,000 litres, but the result was worth it. When the loading was complete, I headed to the selling point. I drove carefully. The weight of the locomotive had increased several times, and braking with that much weight wasn't easy, but everything went smoothly. Once I arrived, I began unloading. As a result, we earned just over $150,000, an excellent outcome. I was truly happy, because now we had a serious amount of money that could be invested in developing the farm, buying new equipment, building structures, or laying new tracks. By that time, the day was already coming to an end. I returned to the base, parked the locomotive under the shelter, turned off the lights, and went to rest. Tomorrow will be an important day. Time to wisely spend the money we earned. happened. Waking up in the morning, the first thing I did, as usual, was go check on the sheep, and strangely enough, once again the entire storage area was filled with wool pallets. Overnight, they managed to produce a solid amount. The wool urgently needed to be transported, but there was a problem. We had sold our old trailer yesterday, and the new one, although spacious, was meant only for bulk crops. So I decided to start the day by buying a flatbed for our train. It's perfect for transporting pallets, and it can also be used to move machinery. I immediately got into the locomotive and headed to the store. Once there, I picked out a sturdy railroad flat car costing $20,000 and made the purchase right away. But my spending didn't end there. To avoid moving pallets by hand, I also bought a forklift. It cost $55,000, but I'm sure the investment will pay off quickly. The forklift was loaded directly onto the flat car at the store. I just made sure to strap it down tightly so that nothing would shift during the ride. And then I coupled the flat car to the locomotive. After that, I headed back home. But then a new task appeared: how to safely unload the forklift. There wasn't time to build a proper ramp, so I used pallets and, in construction mode, put together a simple but sturdy wooden ramp. It did the job perfectly. After carefully unloading the forklift, I moved the train a bit closer to the sheep pen and began loading. At first, it felt unfamiliar. I had to match the height and be precise, but soon I got the hang of it and was able to lift 2 pallets at once. Once all the wool was loaded, I got back into the locomotive and calmly headed to the selling point. On the way, I noticed that with 2 wagons, our locomotive felt much heavier, even with the grain wagon empty. Braking became noticeably harder. At one point, I even slightly overshot a turn, but everything turned out fine. After arriving at the destination, I unfastened the straps, unloaded the pallets, and soon we received just over $25,000 for the wool. A nice result. With this money, we'll once again be able to invest in the development of the farm. After that, I calmly returned home. Our field already needed to be prepared for the next sowing. So without delay, I drove the tractor up to the shelter, attached the cultivator, and headed towards the field. There was a lot of work ahead. The soil after harvesting was compacted and needed thorough tilling. The tractor moved forward confidently, leaving behind even strips of plowed, loosened soil. This was an important step because the quality of soil preparation determines how quickly and evenly our future crops will sprout, which means a new stage is coming very soon: sowing. When I had worked through about half of the first field, I realized we urgently needed more powerful equipment. The work was progressing too slowly, and I still had plans to expand the farm. Maybe I'd enlarge the current fields or even create a new one. The harvest from them brings excellent profit. We've already seen that in practice. So I headed to the store to pick out a new tractor and a suitable cultivator. The old cultivator could no longer handle the job. I sold it right away, but I decided not to rush with the tractor. It might still come in handy for lighter tasks. Once at the store, I carefully looked through the full range of large tractors. In the end, I chose a powerful case model. It cost us nearly $85,000. Expensive, but definitely worth it. Then I moved on to choosing a cultivator and bought a 6-meter disc harrow for $37,500. After all the purchases, we had around $20,000 left in the account. Now it was time to transport the equipment home. First, I got into our old tractor and drove it to the farm. Its speed was decent enough to get there quickly, but I decided to transport the new large tractor by train. Driving it on the road would take too long. It's heavy, and its top speed is low. However, a problem arose: how to load such heavy equipment onto the train's flat car right at the store. I decided to build a small branch from the main railway line. That way, I could conveniently drive onto the platform from ground level. Once everything was ready, I got into the locomotive and went to test out my idea. I drove up to the ramp, switched to the tractor, attached the new cultivator to it, and carefully drove onto the flat car. Everything went great. The equipment rolled on without much effort. I just had to strap it down securely, and I could head home. Once I arrived at the farm, I carefully unloaded the tractor using our makeshift ramp, but when I was about to park it under the shelter, I realized there was no room left. It was already full. I had to invest in another shelter, which I built nearby for $10,000. Now, we have enough space even for future purchases. And while the equipment rests under a roof, I went off to rest too. A new day is ahead, with even more work waiting. In the morning, as usual, I went to check on our sheep. It turned out they had run out of grass. The feeder was completely empty. Without wasting time, I got into the tractor, attached the mower, and went to harvest some fresh greens. The yield was decent. We completely filled the feeder, and there was still a bit left in the trailer for next time. A good start to the day. Next, it was time to take care of the wool storage. It was full again. I switched to the forklift, carefully loaded all the pallets onto the railroad flat car, and drove them to the selling point. The sale was successful, and our balance increased by $25,000. Returning home, I decided to work on the crossing we had previously built to access the tracks near our fields. It had been made out of regular pallets, and the locomotive would bounce slightly when passing over it. Not very reliable, so I dismantled the old structure and replaced it with solid concrete slabs. The new crossing turned out much smoother and more stable. After that, I started up our new tractor and continued cultivating the fields. With the upgraded equipment, the job went noticeably faster and easier. Work was progressing well, and the result was satisfying to see. When both of our fields were fully prepared for sowing, I started thinking about expansion. The harvest from the current plots was bringing in good income, but I wanted more. So I decided to create one more large field, so that in the future, our earnings would increase several times over. I chose a suitable spot. The plain was flat, spacious, and perfect for working. But before starting to till the soil, I focused on logistics. After all, without convenient access for equipment and transportation of the harvest, working there wouldn't be efficient. I began laying a railroad branch to the new field. My goal was simple: to connect the farm with the future field and loop that route into the main line near the selling point. As a result, we ended up with a full circular route from the farm through all the fields, straight to the selling point and back. Now, we'll be able to transport both equipment and harvested crops without unnecessary trips, quickly, conveniently, and with minimal time waste. One more step toward turning our farm into a true production empire. I also decided to build on our farm the same kind of convenient ramp we had made near the store, so that we could neatly load and unload equipment directly from the train. I chose a spot between the railway tracks and the sheep pen for the construction. There was enough space, and it fit perfectly into our layout. As a result, we got a compact but very functional train loading area with a platform, and went to rest. By that time, the sheep had once again produced a good amount of wool. Without wasting time, I loaded the pallets onto the platform, secured them, and headed to the selling point. With the money earned, and it was a solid amount once again, I decided to continue improving our infrastructure and built another bypass railway line. Now, logistics on our farm have become even more convenient. We can bypass equipment and easily rearrange the train and switch wagons. Next to the new bypass track, I also decided to build turning switches so that we could attach and detach wagons from the needed side. This greatly simplifies maneuvering, especially with long trains. As soon as everything was ready, I decided to test the system right away. Today, I needed to detach the grain wagon and leave only the flatbed. It would be used to transport equipment. The operation went flawlessly. I carefully left the grain wagon under the shelter and moved the flatbed over to our new ramp. There, the large tractor was already waiting. It would need to be transported to the place where our new field would soon appear. But I'll handle that tomorrow. It's been a busy day, and now it's the perfect time to get some rest. Early in the morning, I got into the tractor, started it up, and carefully drove it onto the railroad flatbed. After that, I switched to the locomotive and headed to the very spot where we planned to create a new field. Now everything was ready to begin the first stage, working the virgin land and preparing it for future sowing. Once on site, I opened construction mode and began marking the boundaries of the future field. I wanted to make it as even as possible so that it would be easy to work on in the future. A few minutes later, everything was ready. I immediately got to work. First, I carefully plowed the outer edges of the field to see its actual size, and I was pleasantly surprised. The new field turned out to be even larger than our two previous ones combined, but that's only a plus. The harvest from it will bring us much more profit, especially if everything is done right. The work wasn't easy. Plowing took the whole day, but the result was worth it. When the job was done, I loaded the tractor back onto the flatbed and headed home. Once back at the farm, I parked the equipment, turned off the engine, and went to rest. It had truly been a productive day. Waking up in the morning, I immediately remembered our main task for today, to sow all the fields. Without wasting any time, I got into our old but reliable tractor, attached the seeder, and got to work. The seeds left over from last time were enough for the two older fields, and that's exactly how it turned out. Both plots were fully sown shortly after. Everything was going according to plan, but with the new large field, things didn't go so smoothly. The existing supply clearly wasn't enough, and since there was hardly any money left in the account, I decided to sell the wool that had already accumulated in storage. The deal brought in the needed amount, and on the way back, I stopped by the store and bought a large stock of seeds. After returning to the farm, I loaded the purchased seeds into the seeder and then placed it along with the tractor onto the flatbed. After that, I headed to the new field and without delay began sowing. I finished late in the evening when the sun had almost disappeared beyond the horizon. Sowing was complete, and all the equipment stood in the field, glinting tiredly in the sunset light. I carefully gathered all the machinery, loaded it onto the flatbed, and took the train back to the farm. A lot of work had been done that day, but now only one thing remained: to wait for the planted canola to sprout and begin growing. Once back, I parked the equipment, drove the tractors under the shelters, and finally allowed myself to take a breath. Stepping outside early on a December morning, I saw that the canola was almost ripe. Just a little more time, and we could start the harvest. While the crop was maturing, we kept selling wool, and the account balance had grown to almost $157,000. I decided not to wait and invested that money into another harvester. The amount of work this time would be massive, and with only one harvester, it would take us far too long. With two, everything would go much faster. Since I was heading to the store anyway, I also decided to sell the wool our sheep had produced overnight. I quickly loaded the pallets onto the flatbed and went to the selling point. The earnings were excellent. Now the balance showed just over $180,000. That was more than enough for a major purchase. At the store, I picked out a reliable harvester and also bought a header for $30,000. Now we have everything we need for a large-scale harvest. All that's left is to wait for the canola to fully ripen. After all the purchases, we still had nearly $46,000 left in the account. This amount will soon be invested into further development of our farm as well. But for now, it was time to transport the new harvester. I got behind the wheel, attached the header, carefully drove the machine onto the railroad flatbed, securely fastened everything with straps, and headed home. Now everything is ready for harvesting our canola. All the fields are sown and fully prepared. Very soon, they will bring us a solid profit. Waking up early in the morning, I already knew that the main task for today would be harvesting the canola. We had several huge fields at our disposal, fully ready for harvesting. But first, there was another job to take care of, selling all the wool we had collected the evening before. As usual, I decided to load it onto our locomotive's flatbed. After bringing the train over, I got into the forklift and got to work. Thanks to my experience, I handled the loading quickly. All the wool was on the platform in just a few minutes. Then I headed to the selling point. We were paid almost $20,000 for the entire batch, a pretty good sum that would allow us to buy new equipment for the upcoming harvest campaign. One of our fields is quite far from the farm, so I needed to arrange transportation for the equipment. I decided to buy an additional flatbed, as well as an auger trailer for unloading the crop directly into the train wagon on site. This trailer cost us $26,500, which is quite reasonable for such a useful machine. I asked to have the trailer loaded onto the platform, strapped everything down securely, attached it to the locomotive, and headed back home. Using the large tractor, I carefully unloaded the trailer from the platform. Now it's ready for use and will come in handy for grain transport. Everything was prepared and we could begin the harvest. I got into our small harvester, drove it to the field and hired a worker. I did the same with the new harvester. It was sent to the second field. My job now is to supervise the process, empty the harvester tanks on time, and deliver the collected crop to the grain elevator. The harvest was in full swing. The harvesters moved steadily across the fields, cutting canola and filling their tanks. As soon as one of them was full, I immediately brought over the trailer and unloaded the crop. The new trailer turned out to be really convenient. It could hold quite a lot of canola, so I had to drive to the grain elevator much less often than before. This noticeably sped up the entire process and made the work easier. Even though we had two harvesters, the harvest still took quite a bit of time. I finished the work only closer to the evening. At the end of the day, I unloaded the remaining crop from the tanks, parked the harvesters, and delivered the canola to the grain elevator. This time, we gathered a bit less than the last, about 73,000 litres of canola. In the future, we definitely need to fertilize the fields. Otherwise, the yield will decrease each time. When I noticed the sun was already setting, I headed back to the farm. We wouldn't have time to work the large remaining field today. I think we'll be able to harvest much more from it. After parking the tractor, I finally went to rest, because tomorrow, even more work awaits us. The next morning began with me checking on our sheep. They had completely run out of grass, but there was still a bit of feed left in the trailer, so I just emptied it into the feeder. I didn't start mowing new grass. There was already plenty to do today. Another task for the morning was selling wool. Our storage was completely full, and there was nowhere to put any new wool. I loaded the wagon, headed to the selling point, and topped up our account. The amount was quite decent. Returning to the farm, I began preparing for the upcoming harvest. I brought the wagons to the ramp and started loading the equipment. First, I got into the harvester and carefully drove it onto the platform. Then I did the same with the second harvester. Once both were on the train, I headed toward our field. It's quite far from the farm, and moving the equipment there manually would have taken too much time. With the train, it was much faster. On site, I unloaded the machinery, hired workers, and they immediately began the harvest. Meanwhile, I got back into the train and went to fetch the tractor with the trailer. I also brought along a grain wagon. After all, the harvested crop had to go somewhere. This wagon is quite spacious, so the harvest from one field should easily fit inside. When I returned to the field, both harvesters were already full and waiting to be unloaded. I quickly removed the straps from the equipment, got into the tractor, and headed straight to the harvesters to begin transporting the crop. The entire day was spent harvesting that field. There was really a lot of canola. The harvesters were filling their tanks almost non-stop, and I had to drive back and forth constantly to transport the crop in time. The work went on without a break, and the field slowly but steadily became cleaner and cleaner. By evening, I was finishing up the harvest. The entire field had been cleared. All that remained was to transport the collected crop and the equipment we had used throughout the day. When I unloaded the last trailer, our wagon turned out to be almost completely full, which meant we had already collected more than 200,000 liters of canola from that field. That result truly made me happy, because with that volume, we could earn approximately $300,000, and that's a very large amount that will seriously help us in further developing the farm. First, I loaded the tractor with the trailer and headed back to the farm. On the way, I unloaded the canola at the grain elevator. In total, there were nearly 304,000 liters of crop in storage. Considering the current prices for canola, we'll be able to make over $500,000 from it. That's just an excellent result. However, it was too early to relax. The harvesters were still out in the field, and it was already nearly dark. I quickly unloaded the tractor and went back for the remaining equipment. I managed to bring the harvesters back to the farm in complete darkness. I didn't unload them. I'll take care of that in the morning. I'm sure nothing will happen to them overnight. Having finished all the tasks and thinking back on what a busy day it had been, I went to rest in a good mood. The next morning, I immediately went to unload the harvesters and park them under the shelter. After that, I switched to the forklift and started working with the wool, which had already fully accumulated and needed to be sold. After loading the entire batch onto the platform, I headed to the selling point. After a successful deal and the received profit, I decided to stop by for another grain wagon on the way back. The thing is, all the harvested canola wouldn't fit in our old wagon, so we needed another one. I spent $40,000 on it, but I'm sure it will significantly speed up transportation in the future. First, I detached the platforms at the ramp, then went to hook up our first grain wagon. Once everything was ready, I headed to the grain elevator to load the entire harvest into the wagons. The process took quite a while. The volumes were large, and the loading went slowly. In the end, we ended up with almost 1.5 wagons of canola. Now, all that remained was to deliver the crop to the selling point. I set off carefully. I tried to drive as cautiously as possible, since our locomotive wasn't designed for that much weight, and braking was difficult because of it. But everything went well. As soon as the wagon was over the receiving pit of the elevator, I started unloading. As a result, our balance rose to almost $525,000, an absolutely fantastic amount. That's enough to purchase everything necessary for the further development of the farm, making it more efficient and profitable. First, I decided to purchase a new locomotive. Our old one could no longer handle most of the tasks we were facing. I didn't sell it though, as it might still come in handy. So I returned the old locomotive to the farm, and at the store, chose the most powerful and modern option available. The new locomotive was truly massive and quite expensive. It cost us $120,000. I hope it pays for itself over time. After the purchase, I brought it back to the farm. Noticing that both locomotives no longer fit under the old shelter, I decided to build a separate shed for them. I added a small railway branch and installed a large 4-slot shelter. Now all the equipment is safely stored and located in one place. After that, I started thinking about improving my living conditions. Living in a small trailer was becoming less and less comfortable, so I decided to build a proper house next to it. I kept the trailer, mostly for sentimental reasons, and I didn't want to get rid of it. At the same time, I rebuilt the fence to make it look neater and placed a spacious 2-car garage across from the new house. I planted a few trees just to add a cozy atmosphere. As a result, we ended up with a pretty nice spot for relaxing. Once the construction was finished, I decided to work on the old sheep pen. I wanted to rebuild it and make it more spacious. But first, I needed to clear the wool storage. I brought over the flatbed, carefully loaded all the wool that had accumulated, and parked the train back under the shelter. It was already dark, and surely there would be more pallets the next day. After finishing all the tasks, I finally went to rest. As expected, early in the morning, more wool pallets had appeared near the sheep pen. I immediately loaded them onto the platform and headed to the selling point. This batch brought in almost $50,000. When I returned home, I saw that a few more pallets had appeared while I was gone. I didn't feel like going back to the store again, so I just loaded them onto the platform and parked it under the shelter. I'll take them for sale later. Since the wool storage was now completely empty, I decided to move on to the next step, selling the sheep. I sold all the animals from that pen and earned just over $67,000. Once the pen was empty, I entered construction mode and removed the old structure. In its place, I built a new large sheep barn, costing $80,000. It turned out to be very convenient and spacious. Now we have more room and better opportunities for developing livestock farming. After placing the sheep in the new pen, I had to take care of their feed right away. Since they eat grass, I went over to our old tractor, attached the mower, and started mowing. After cutting a small amount of grass, I swapped the mower for the forage trailer and began filling it. Once it was full, I emptied all the grass into the sheep feeder. After repeating the process one more time, I completely filled the feeder. Now all that remained was to wait for wool production to begin. Just in case, I prepared one more full trailer of grass, so I could quickly refill the feeder later when it starts running low. The next step I decided to take was building greenhouses to generate additional products for sale. I chose the largest greenhouses. We had enough money for them. Nearby, I placed tanks with automatic water supply so it would never run out. The entire construction cost us $110,000. I believe we'll be able to earn good money from the products they produce. But to get the greenhouses running, I needed to buy seeds and fertilizer. I headed to the train and rode it to the store. First, I purchased a more spacious wagon for transporting pallets. It cost $35,000. After that, I bought 16 boxes of seeds and 16 boxes of fertilizer. All materials were loaded onto the new flatbed. I attached it to our train and headed back. When I arrived at the greenhouses, I grabbed the wheel loader to begin unloading. The work went quickly, and soon I had evenly distributed 8 boxes of seeds and 8 boxes of fertilizer into each greenhouse. After that, all that remained was to start production, which I did. Now I could calmly go rest while the resources are being used and the greenhouses start producing goods. Waking up in December, I discovered that we had a small debt, just $5,000. But luckily, during that time, the greenhouses had produced a large amount of vegetables and it was time to sell them. I brought over the train and started loading. One wagon was completely filled with carrots, and another 3 flatbeds were packed with pallets of other vegetables. After that, I headed to the selling point. On the first trip, I managed to earn just over $244,000. which was a big relief, especially considering that we still had a lot of products left. So I immediately returned home to continue loading. Only by the evening was I able to send off the last train full of vegetables. By that point, our balance was already approaching $2 million. I also remembered that the sheep had produced quite a bit of wool during that time. On the way, I stopped by the farm, picked up all the pallets, and delivered them to the store. After selling them, our balance reached just over $1,900,000. That's simply an amazing result. We've built a farm that generates millions a year. We have 3 large fields, lots of equipment, and 2 locomotives running along our railway. And if you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.